Hey, today I wanted to go over the set Lucent Echoes. I'm going to be splitting this video into two parts, the first part being about pugs from Craglorn, and the second part about optimized groups and how they can make good use out of this set. I really quickly want to go over the basic ways of increasing your critical damage, because some of the sources you'll never see in pug groups, and it will make Lucent Echoes far better. Starting off with the basic numbers we need to look at for later, all characters in ESO have a base critical damage rating of 50%, with typical ways of getting to the cap of 125% using Major Force, Minor Force, EC, 6 to 7 medium armor, minor brittle, harpooners, fighting finesse, being a Templar, Nightblade, or Warden, being an Arcanist, and Lucent Echoes. Using these values as a basis, we can see when and why Lucent Echoes would be a good set to run. In any group, our goal is to get the DPS as close to 125% crit damage as possible. Doing this in a pug will normally never happen due to missing a few key buffs and debuffs. However, in most optimized groups, we will be sitting at the crit cap already for the entire fight. Looking at pug groups first, as it's far easier to understand why Lucent Echoes is better and a good option to have while tanking. I'm going to make a couple of assumptions based on the majority of group comps. The first is going to be assuming that your DPS are almost entirely made up of Arcanists. Arcanist is by far the most widely played class even for a DLC class. I'm going to make two other assumptions that have to do more with your critical damage. I'm going to assume Major Force will not be kept up very well, or at least not coordinated, as most pug groups won't have someone calling their ultimates. Lastly, I'm going to assume EC is not in the group. While it sometimes pops up in crag pugs or just pugs in general, 90% of the time you will not see it in your group. With that out of the way, we can start to look at where most groups will be sitting in terms of their critical damage. We can assume that since most players are Arcanists, that Philothy and Coral Riptide are probably being used. We can also make a safe bet that if Coral Riptide isn't being used, it's most likely Onzel's Torment being used instead. This means that most DPS in your groups will be sitting around 5 to 7 pieces of medium armor. We can also make the assumption that minor brittle is going to be kept up in one way or another. With these assumptions, we can see that the DPS are most likely sitting around 92 to 96% critical damage. If we then add your horn into this, or however Major Force is being procced, you can see that right now we are sitting around 116% critical damage. So even with Major Force being procced, we can still fit most of the bonus from Lucent Echoes underneath the cap. One thing that can become a problem with this is if DPS are running the Fighting Finesse CP. With a horn, this will bump them to 124 critical damage, meaning Lucent Echoes is almost entirely wasted. However, with most pugs not keeping Major Force for the most part above 20% uptime, this will never become a significant enough problem to drop Lucent Echoes. Overall, for pug groups, Lucent Echoes is a great set and requires no management besides keeping your health above 50%. Looking towards optimized groups. Lucent Echoes for more optimized groups becomes a lot more interesting because EC has been the leading way to get DPS to the crit cap for years, and at this point most groups running trifectas or harder content have every DPS at or near the crit cap for most of the fights. Lucent Echoes on paper doesn't seem to really have a spot in most groups because of this. EC is generally easy to keep up and can hit 15% critical damage for everyone. Before going over Lucent Echoes in boss fight group comps, I want to go over one very easy way to make use of Lucent Echoes. Lucent Echoes in Trash is amazing. EC was always used in Trash before, however it takes roughly 3 GCDs or 3 seconds to get EC fully procced and running. This normally isn't much of an issue, but in optimized group, Trash dies in roughly 5 to 8 seconds, and so instead of having 2 to 3 seconds of ramp time from EC, you can just always have it there with Lucent Echoes. While it is a smaller damage buff at only 11% crit damage, it is always running and you don't have to do anything special to proc, so as soon as the trash gets pulled, it will be running and you'll be good to go. This also frees up a set on whoever is running EC, normally the Crow. With that out of the way, now I want to talk about how to use Lucent Echoes in boss fights. Lucent Echoes is basically in the same role as EC, allowing DPS to hit the crit cap without using CP to get there. However, Lucent Echoes doesn't allow for Dragonites or Sorks to get there without using Fighting Finesse. They will always come up short unless they are running an extra crit buff like Nunatuck, but Nunatuck is not widely used and is used only in very small circumstances. One other small issue with Lucent Echoes making it harder to fit into some group comps is the typical group comp for tanking is DK and Sork or DK and Necro. This normally would not be any sort of issue, but since it has to be body, it fights with the set Pearlescent Ward. Since 90% of the time, the off-tank being the Necro and Sork are using Sax and PA. This means you have two body sets that are fighting for the same spot. You'll either have to drop sacks, or the main tank will have to drop their Master Soren board or Master's Ice Staff. If they are fine doing this, there's no real issue with this setup. However, some people are not used to tanking without the Master Soren board or the Master's Ice Staff. There are other ways to get this setup to work. If you are Slayer stacking, you can put Master's Architect on a healer and PA on that healer, freeing up a slot on the off tank to use Lucent Echoes and just backbarring Saxleals instead. Since the most common strat in the game for Slayer is Rojo, you'll have to make sacrifices to get Lucent Echoes on one of your tanks. Now with that long-winded explanation out of the way, I want to look more specifically at when it's a good time to drop EC versus when EC is better to keep than Lucent Echoes. The reason I want to look at this is because EC is technically a better buff at 15% than Lucent Echoes 11%. The easiest way to look at this is, can your EC keep up all three around 80% of the time on all of the priority targets? If yes, EC is almost always going to be more worth it than Lucent Echoes. However, there are certain fights where this is either very hard to do or downright impossible. In these cases, Lucent Echoes will become stronger. A good example for a trial I'd rather have EC than Lucent Echoes is Sunspire. For the most part, you are only focusing on one thing. This is the dragon. These fights are mainly focused on a dragon, with Atros and other side enemies being focused at a completely separate time when the dragon is no longer in the arena. An example of a fight that I'd rather have Lucent Echoes on is Twins from DSR. If you aren't doing the strat where everyone hugs one boss, then the group's damage will be split into two different groups, and you can't expect your EC to reliably keep it up on two different bosses that are quite far away from each other. These are just two very quick examples that I thought of while writing this video. You'll want to look at your group's EC uptimes on all priority targets and see if the uptime is within the range you are expecting. If not, you may just be better off using Lucent Echoes anyway. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something or just enjoyed the video. This script got rewritten about 20 or so times. I wasn't really satisfied with explanations, and I'm still not entirely. There's some stuff I'd want to talk about, but I feel like there's just no real reason to, as the explanations would just be extremely long for no reason. But yeah, overall I feel like Lucent Echoes is a really good addition to the game, and it'll help a lot of pug groups hit higher damage numbers, as it's extremely easy to keep up and there's not really any maintenance to it. However, I don't think this set alone has killed EC, and I think EC will still be used in a lot of groups, as the 15% is quite a bit stronger than you would think. But yeah, that's the video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.